Hello, my name is Bianca Romero, and this is my thesis presentation. My project is titled Encounters, the Geography of Urban Colonial Actions in French Vietnam. And just to begin, I want to read this quote. The deepest problems of modern life flow from the attempt of the individual to maintain the independence and individuality of his existence against the sovereign powers of society, against the weight of historical heritage, and the external and cultural technique of life. And so that quote is kind of what got me started. I was thinking about urbanism in general and the way that people are relating to their urban environments. And I wondered what that would look like in the context of French colonialism. So, going on, I just want to explain the zones of interactions are kind of what I was examining within the colonial city. So, the context for that and the theory the French colonial mission in French Indochina mostly happens during the Second Empire and the Third Republic, which was a period of insecurity for the French. They had lost Alsace Lorraine, and they were really obsessed with the idea of creating a greater France and instilling Francophilia in outer territories. So treaties began ceding territory to the French from Vietnam around 1860. Eventually, and it starts out with that strong assimilation theory, and then it turns to more of associationist point of view, where they view colonialism as more of an interactive engagement with colonized people, which leads to something called colonial mimicry, in which the colonized people will purposefully take on attributes of the colonizing culture as a way to kind of conform to that domination. And as well as the art of the contact zone, which is a theory identified by Mary Louise Pratt, which talks about the intentional incorporation of colonizing elements into colonized culture as a form of agency and expression within the colonizing experience, the colonial experience. So my project kind of teases at both of those theories and their tension with one another. So going forward, I did a uh, case study of three cities, Saigon, which is kind of the Western city. So as a result, I mostly examined white women through the book The Lover by Marguerite Duras and examined the ways in which Duras' protagonist is able to traverse the assumed harsh borders of colonialism, and the way that that affects her identity as a white person, as a woman, and her class status influences how she's perceived. And so then shifting to Hanoi, which is the capital city for the majority of the colonial project, that kind of draws out more the interracial, that drew out for me more the interracial relationships and the way that French people and Vietnamese people are going to be interacting. So for city planning, that meant that there was preferential treatment in French quarters. French quarters were meant for French people, and Vietnamese quarters were often underdeveloped. You can see I have pictures of the Vietnamese quarter versus the French quarter here, which were really grand and very nice. They had a lot of good amenities. And so going forward with that, I wanted to see where the borders of the harsh borders between French people and Vietnamese people were being blurred. And I examined that through the book The Industry of Marrying Europeans, which is about mixed race marriages, as well as Luxie and other examinations of um, prostitution, which would, of course, be one of the main interactions between French men and Vietnamese women. And then Kim Lefebvre was an influence as well, and I read a little bit about her early on in my process. And then finally, my studies took me to Dalat, which is the summer capital. It was the hill station, and eventually they wanted it to be the main capital because the French feared that they were losing their power in Vietnam, and so they needed to be in a exclusively French space. So this would have been a segregated. They wanted it to be a segregated city. They want it to be completely French, but that is prohibitive in a country that is majority Vietnamese. So of course they ended up not having that be followed through, and there are Vietnamese bourgeois that actually move in and make it and kind of make the space more of an upper class space for Vietnamese people within the colonial system. All right, going from Vietnamese people started achieving these pillars of Frenchness and challenging the colonial project and creating discourse, which eventually leads to resistance and new forms of nationalism. And that is my project. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a great day. Here are my sources.